Elliot Crowvale, a billionaire whose empire seemed untouchable, and Mariselle Aquino, his young and elegant pregnant wife, appeared to live a perfect life. But behind the walls of their sprawling California mansion, secrets festered, and trust began to crumble. A shocking discovery about Maricelle's past set Elliot on a path no one could have predicted. For 40 silent minutes, the estate's cameras were disabled, and by morning, everything changed forever. Every move, every decision, and every hidden document led to a mystery that shakes the very meaning of love, power, and control. You won't believe what unfolded behind closed doors, and once you see the truth, you'll be forced to watch every chapter until the very end. This is a story of obsession, betrayal, and a darkness that hides behind wealth, and it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Elliot Crowvale had spent decades crafting a life that looked flawless from the outside. As an American billionaire in the technology world, his name rarely appeared in scandals. He avoided interviews, avoided attention, and allowed his wealth to speak quietly through private investments and closed-door deals. To the public, he was disciplined, intelligent, and untouchable. That image became even stronger the day news broke that he had married a young Filipina woman named Mariselle Aquino. Their relationship seemed to appear out of nowhere. One year Elliot was known as a lifelong bachelor, and the next he was photographed on a private beach, standing beside a woman with a gentle smile and calm eyes. Media outlets called it unexpected but beautiful. Headlines praised the age gap as proof that love had no rules. Online comments admired Maricelle's elegance and soft presence. She looked nothing like the loud, flashy partners usually linked to wealthy men. She looked peaceful, almost fragile. The wedding itself was quiet but expensive. No celebrities, no long guest lists, only close associates and carefully chosen images released afterward. Every photo showed perfection. Mariselle always stood slightly behind Elliot, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile never changing. To viewers, it looked romantic. To those who studied body language, it looked rehearsed. After the marriage, Mariselle moved from the Philippines to Elliot's massive estate in California. The property was hidden behind tall gates, surrounded by trees and guarded day and night. It was designed to keep the world out. Inside, everything was controlled. Schedules were fixed. Rooms were monitored. Staff followed strict rules about movement and communication. At first, Mariselle shared small glimpses of her new life online. Sunlit hallways, garden paths, quiet breakfasts by the pool. Then, without explanation, the post stopped. Weeks passed. Fans assumed privacy. No one questioned it. When the pregnancy announcement came, it felt like a celebration. Elliot released a short statement expressing gratitude and hope. The public image of the couple shifted from mysterious to admired. A billionaire starting a family. A young wife becoming a mother. Everything seemed to fall perfectly into place. But inside the mansion, the mood changed. Staff members noticed that Mariselle was rarely seen alone anymore. Medical visits increased. Security routines became tighter. Some doors were no longer accessible to her. Meals were scheduled and monitored. Even the garden walks stopped. Elliot, once distant but calm, became focused and intense. His days were filled with private calls and closed meetings. Legal advisors visited more often than family friends. Documents were reviewed repeatedly. Questions were asked about things that should have already been known. Maricelle's smile remained in the few photos that were released, but it no longer reached her eyes. Her posture changed. Her movements slowed. The pregnancy was progressing, yet the warmth around it felt missing. To the outside world, everything still looked perfect. There were no public arguments, no reports of trouble, no signs of danger, just silence. But silence can be the loudest warning. By the time people began to notice how completely Mariselle had vanished from public view, it was already too late. Something inside the Crowvale mansion had shifted. A truth was moving beneath the surface, waiting to rise. And the life that once looked like a modern fairy tale was already heading toward a dark and irreversible end. The shift began quietly, almost invisibly, the way danger often does. After the pregnancy announcement, Elliot Crowvale's attention moved away from public image and toward details no one else could see. His days became consumed by paperwork, background verifications, and private requests that never left official records. To those around him, it looked like preparation for fatherhood. In reality, it was the start of something far more unsettling. Elliot had always believed that control was the foundation of success. He trusted numbers more than people and documents more than promises. As his empire grew, so did his habit of verifying everything twice. That same habit now turned inward, toward his own marriage. He ordered a full legal review of Mariselle Aquino's identity, something that was highly unusual after marriage papers had already been signed and approved. The request was handled discreetly by Naomi Crest, his longtime financial advisor. She accessed international databases, immigration records, and archived civil files from the Philippines. At first, everything seemed normal. Birth certificates matched passports. School records aligned with travel history. Then a secondary registry appeared, one that had never been included in the original marriage verification. The dates did not match. Mariselle was not the age Elliot believed she was. The difference was not small enough to ignore, nor large enough to explain easily. It was just enough to shake his certainty. Just enough to suggest that something about her past had been hidden, whether intentionally or not. For Elliot, uncertainty was unacceptable. As Naomi continued digging, Elliot began reviewing his own future plans with new intensity. Trusts created for an unborn child were paused. Insurance policies were adjusted. Property ownership structures were quietly modified. None of it raised alarms on its own, but together they painted a picture of retreat rather than expansion. At the same time, Elliot's behavior toward Mariselle became colder. Medical supervision increased. Independent visits were discouraged. Information about her health flowed through channels Elliot controlled. The pregnancy, once a symbol of legacy, now felt like a complication he could not fully calculate. Mariselle sensed the change. The house felt smaller, even though nothing physically moved. Familiar routines disappeared. Her world narrowed to rooms, appointments, and waiting. She was surrounded by luxury, but deprived of freedom. The silence around her was heavy, filled with unanswered questions. Meanwhile, Elliot's research grew darker. He reviewed legal cases involving annulments, disputed identities, and inheritance conflicts involving unborn children. He studied how wealth could be protected when personal narratives collapsed. His fear was not public shame. It was exposure. The idea that his carefully built image rested on a mistake, or worse, a deception, consumed him. The age discovery began to grow inside his mind, changing meaning with every thought. It was no longer just a number. It became a symbol of loss of control. If one detail could be wrong, what else could be uncertain? And if uncertainty existed, so did risk. Security logs from the estate showed increased manual overrides. Surveillance systems were tested more often. Staff schedules were adjusted. Access points were redefined. Everything inside the mansion began to operate like a sealed environment, prepared for an unknown outcome. Outside the gates, the world remained unaware. Business partners saw nothing unusual. Social media showed nothing alarming. The silence protected Elliot, just as he intended. But the truth has a way of pressing outward. Naomi Crest began to feel uneasy. The financial changes were too sudden, too defensive. The identity discrepancy, while explainable through clerical error, had triggered a reaction far beyond reason. Yet questioning Elliot was never an option. His decisions were final, and his confidence allowed no challenge. By the time the age discovery was fully confirmed, Elliot was no longer searching for clarity. He was searching for escape. The mansion, once a symbol of privacy and peace, had transformed into a place of tension and calculation. Every step taken inside it was deliberate. Every move was measured against a future Elliot was no longer sure he wanted. And somewhere within those quiet walls, a decision was forming, one that would change everything and leave no room for reversal the night everything ended arrived without warning, wrapped in routine and silence. Inside the Crowvale estate, nothing appeared different from any other evening. The lights followed their programmed patterns. Security guards remained at their assigned posts. The mansion rested behind its gates like a fortress untouched by the outside world. What no one realized at the time was that the systems protecting the house were no longer fully automated. Earlier that evening, Elliot Crowvale had accessed the central control panel from his private study. This was something he rarely did himself. Surveillance logs later showed a manual override initiated shortly after midnight. Cameras covering key interior corridors stopped recording. Exterior sensors remained active, giving the illusion of normal operation. For exactly 40 minutes, the house existed without memory. During that window, Mariselle Aquino was alone in a guest wing she had been moved to days earlier. The explanation given to staff was medical rest. The room was comfortable, quiet, and far from the master suite. It was also out of view of most internal cameras even under normal conditions. Medical records showed that Mariselle had been experiencing fatigue and dizziness, common during pregnancy. That made what happened next easier to hide. A ray sedative entered her bloodstream, carefully measured and fast-acting. It caused deep unconsciousness within minutes, slowing breathing without immediate distress. To an untrained eye, it would look like sudden illness. By the time the surveillance system returned to normal, nothing appeared out of place. Morning arrived calmly. Staff followed routine procedures. Breakfast trays went untouched. When Mariselle did not respond, a wellness check was requested. She was found still, her body positioned as if she had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. Emergency services were not called immediately. Instead, internal protocols were activated. Private medical consultants were contacted first. Time passed. When authorities were finally notified, several critical hours were gone. Those hours mattered. Initial observations suggested complications related to pregnancy. There were no visible signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken objects. The room looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Elliot presented himself as devastated. His appearance was controlled but distant. He avoided extended interaction with police and allowed his legal team to handle communication. The pregnancy was no longer mentioned publicly. The narrative shifted toward tragedy and privacy. But the silence surrounding that night was heavier than grief. When the autopsy was conducted, the truth began to surface. Toxicology tests revealed traces of a chemical sedative not prescribed to Mariselle and not typically used in standard medical care. The dosage suggested precision, not accident. The substance would have required deliberate access and careful planning. Investigators also noticed inconsistencies in the timeline. Security data did not align with staff statements. Surveillance gaps were too clean, too exact. This was not a system error. It was a controlled blackout. As details emerged, the atmosphere around the mansion changed. What was once viewed as a private residence now felt like a sealed crime scene hiding something deeper. The pregnancy, initially described as fragile, became central to the investigation. Medical experts confirmed that Mariselle and the unborn child had both died as a result of the same cause. The idea of coincidence began to fade. Financial records from the days leading up to her death showed sudden activity. Insurance beneficiaries had been adjusted. Legal structures involving future inheritance had been altered. All of it occurred before that silent night. The pieces did not form a clear picture yet, but they were moving closer. Those 40 minutes without surveillance became the most important detail in the case. They represented the only time when something irreversible could have happened without witnesses. And someone had made sure that window existed. By the time investigators started asking deeper questions, the mansion no longer felt like a place of mourning. It felt like a carefully arranged stage where the most important act had already ended. And what remained was not a mystery of how Mariselle died, but why someone had gone to such lengths to make it look like she never fought at all. The investigation changed direction the moment Captain Rowan Ives reviewed the full timeline without assumptions. What had first appeared to be a tragic medical incident now looked carefully shaped. Too many events lined up with purpose. Delays, missing footage, altered records, and financial movements all pointed toward intent rather than chance. Captain Ives ordered a complete forensic review of the Crowvale estate's security infrastructure. Independent technicians confirmed that the camera blackout could not have happened accidentally. The override required a specific access code, one assigned to only 2 people. One of them was Elliot Crowvale. At the same time, financial investigator Victor Halden began tracing the money. He focused on the days before Maricelle's death, looking for anything that broke Elliot's usual patterns. What he found was subtle but alarming. Trust funds meant to activate after the birth had been frozen. Property titles connected to family use had been shifted back into corporate ownership. Insurance beneficiaries had been quietly reassigned. These were not the actions of a grieving husband. They were the actions of someone preparing for an outcome. Medical experts were brought in to analyze the toxicology results again. The sedative found in Mariselle's system was rare, tightly regulated, and not stocked by regular hospitals. Access required private connections, specialized suppliers, or research facilities. Elliot's companies had ties to all three. The pregnancy, once treated as a fragile condition, now became central evidence. Doctors confirmed that Mariselle's health records showed no signs of fatal complications. Her condition had been stable. The unborn child was healthy. There was no medical explanation for what happened without outside interference. As the pressure increased, Elliot's public image began to crack. He withdrew completely from business activity. Board members reported unanswered messages. Meetings were cancelled. His absence, once respected, now raised suspicion. Investigators also examined Elliot's private research history. Data recovered from encrypted devices showed months of searches related to identity disputes, annulment laws, inheritance protections, and unborn child claims. The timing of those searches aligned closely with the age discovery. That discovery resurfaced as the missing motive. Victor Halden connected the identity discrepancy to Elliot's growing fear of exposure. The age difference itself was not illegal, but the implication of deception threatened Elliot's obsession with control. The pregnancy meant permanence. A child meant shared legacy. For someone who measured life in assets and risk, this was unacceptable. Attention turned to Naomi Crest. Under legal pressure, she provided records of Elliot's sudden requests and defensive financial strategies. Her testimony confirmed that the age discrepancy had deeply unsettled him. She described a shift from curiosity to urgency, from preparation to containment. The investigation now had three pillars: motive, means, and opportunity. The motive was control and fear of loss. The means was access to rare chemicals and private systems. The opportunity existed during the 40-minute surveillance blackout. What had once seemed like a private tragedy was now forming into a deliberate act. Captain Ives authorized a full forensic reconstruction of the night. Timelines were rebuilt minute by minute. Movement sensors, door logs, and internal access records placed Elliot in the study during the blackout. His device activity confirmed he was awake and active. There was no longer room for coincidence. As evidence stacked higher, the atmosphere around Elliot shifted from sympathy to scrutiny. His legal team began aggressive defensive strategies, but the facts refused to bend. Every attempt to explain away one detail only exposed another inconsistency. The mansion itself became symbolic. Once designed to hide Elliot from the world, it now trapped him within the very systems he controlled. The walls that protected his privacy preserved the evidence of his actions. By the end of the investigation phase, authorities no longer asked whether Mariselle's death was intentional. They focused only on proving how carefully it had been planned. And as the final reports were prepared, one truth became impossible to ignore. The perfect life Elliot Crowvale built was not unraveling by accident. It was collapsing under the weight of a choice he believed no one would ever see. The fall of Elliot Crowvale did not arrive with flashing lights or loud announcements. It came quietly, the same way he had lived his life, controlled and calculated. In the early hours of the morning, federal agents entered the estate without resistance. The gates opened. Security stood down. The man who once ruled every system inside that mansion was taken away, without a word. News of the arrest spread slowly at first. Investors received private notices. Boards scheduled emergency meetings. Foundations suspended operations. Within days, Elliot's carefully protected empire began to fracture. Accounts were frozen. Assets were reviewed. Projects bearing his name were quietly removed from public spaces. The billionaire who once avoided headlines now dominated them. As legal proceedings moved forward, the evidence spoke louder than any defense ever could. Surveillance reconstructions showed intent. Financial records revealed preparation. Digital histories exposed obsession. The 40 minutes without cameras became the center of the case, a silent window where a life ended and a future was erased. Mariselle Aquino's story finally emerged from the shadow of Elliot's reputation. Investigators uncovered how isolated she had become, how tightly controlled her environment was, how her world had shrunk behind those walls. Medical experts confirmed what many had already suspected. She had not been dying. She had not been weak. She had been silenced. The unborn child became the most devastating part of the case. A life never given a name, never given a chance. The pregnancy Elliot once announced with pride had become the very reason he acted. What should have symbolized growth had instead triggered fear. Public opinion turned sharply. Sympathy vanished. The narrative shifted from tragedy to betrayal. Commentators questioned how power had allowed so much to remain hidden, how silence had protected wealth while costing lives. Naomi Cress's cooperation sealed the case. Her records documented Elliot's mental shift from concern to calculation. Victor Halden's financial analysis mapped the path of intent. Captain Rowan Ives presented a timeline so precise it left no space for doubt. Elliot Crowvale was no longer seen as a visionary or private genius. He was exposed as a man who believed control justified everything. Maricelle's burial was small and private. No cameras. No public statements. Just a quiet goodbye far from the estate where her life ended. Those who attended described it as peaceful, the first moment of freedom she had been given in months. The mansion now stands empty. Its gates remain closed, not to protect privacy, but to preserve evidence. The same walls that once hid Elliot's world now echo with absence. The silence inside is different. It no longer feels controlled. It feels abandoned. As the trial approaches, Elliot waits alone. Stripped of influence, stripped of certainty, stripped of the systems that once obeyed him. The man who trusted only numbers now faces a verdict that no calculation can change. This case leaves behind an unsettling truth. Power does not always reveal itself through noise or violence. Sometimes it hides behind calm smiles, quiet homes, and perfect images. Sometimes it waits until it believes no one is watching. Mariselle Aquino's life ended in silence, but her story did not. It forced open doors meant to stay closed. It exposed the cost of obsession and the danger of unchecked control. And as viewers reach the end of this story, one question remains, lingering long after the screen fades to black. How many other truths are still hidden behind walls built by power, waiting for the moment they finally break free?